The morning I found out, I was holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. I'd been standing at the kitchen window for 20 minutes, just staring at the garden I planted 31 years ago, and I didn't even realize the cup had gone cold in my hands until I tried to take a sip and felt nothing. That detail stayed with me. How you can hold something for so long and not feel it anymore. I was 73 years old. He had just had his attorney file documents that transferred the deed to our home, the home we built together, the home where I raised our children, the home where I buried our dog in the backyard and marked the grave with a river stone, into a private trust. His name only. And when I confronted him, when I stood in that kitchen shaking, he looked at me with the calmest eyes I have ever seen on a human face, and he said, "You were never on the paperwork the way you thought you were." 73 years old. 46 years of marriage. And the man I slept beside through 4 decades of winters looked at me and told me I had never truly owned the life I built. That is where this story begins. Not at the end. Right there. In that kitchen. With that cold cup of tea. But you need to understand how we got there. Because nothing about what happened was sudden. It just felt that way. It felt like one morning you wake up and your entire life has been rearranged while you were sleeping, and the man who rearranged it is sitting at the breakfast table acting like nothing happened. I'm going to tell you everything. And I mean everything. The parts I'm ashamed of. The parts that still make me so angry I have to stop and breathe before I can speak. The parts that I kept silent about for 2 years because I was convinced no one would believe me. I need you to hear this. Because what happened to me is happening to women right now. Women who spent their lives building something real, something rooted, something that was supposed to last, and the person they trusted most decided, at the very end, to take it all. Stay with me. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I was. Who I had been for 46 years. I was a wife. I was a mother of 3. I was a grandmother of 7. I was the woman who kept every receipt, every birthday card, every school drawing pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. I was the woman who made sure the mortgage was paid before the car note, who read the fine print on every insurance policy, who knew exactly how many square feet our house was, and exactly what we had paid for it in 1978, and exactly what it was worth now. I was not naive. I need you to understand that. I was not some woman who handed her life over blindly. I was educated. I was attentive. I paid attention to our finances for 4 decades. I thought I knew where every dollar was. I was 73 years old, married for 46 years, and I genuinely believed I was safe. That belief, that specific feeling of safety, is the most dangerous thing a person can carry into old age. Not because trust is wrong, but because some people will spend 40 years earning that trust just to spend it all in one transaction. And I didn't see it coming. How could I? We had a good life. We had a real life. Not a perfect one, I won't pretend it was perfect, but a life that was built on something solid. Or so I believed. Let me take you back to the beginning of what I now call the stable years. Because you need to feel how real it was before you can understand how devastating the loss was. We married in 1977. I was 27. He was 31. We had nothing. We had a secondhand sofa, a mattress on the floor, and a car that made us sound like a sick animal every time you turned the ignition. We were happy. I want to be clear about that. We were genuinely happy. The kind of happy that doesn't photograph well, because it's too ordinary. It's just 2 people building something together day after day, year after year. He worked in commercial real estate. I worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm until our first child was born, and then I came home, and I never went back to paid work. That was a choice we made together. A choice I believed in. He believed in it too, then. At least I thought he did. Over the years, the money came slowly and steadily. A promotion here. A good year there. We bought the house in 1978, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street, corner lot, big backyard. I still remember the day we got the keys. I cried. Not from joy exactly. From something more complicated than that. From the feeling of permanence. Like we had finally put roots into something that couldn't be taken away. We paid that mortgage for 22 years. 22 years of double payments when we could. of skipping vacations to pay it down faster, of choosing repair over replace because we wanted that house paid off before we got old. We did it. We burned the mortgage documents in the backyard fire pit, and we toasted with cheap champagne, and our kids laughed at us for crying. That house was not just our home. It was our proof. Proof that we had worked, that we had sacrificed, that we had built something real together. He knew exactly what that house meant to me. He knew. And I believe now, I believe with everything in me, that he used that knowledge as a weapon. I didn't realize it then, but the shift started 5 years before it exploded. Looking back, I can see every sign. But living it? You explain things away. You have 40 years of context. You have 40 years of evidence that this person loves you, so when something feels off, you reach for the explanation that fits the history rather than the one that fits the fear. The first sign was the attorney. He had always used the same family lawyer for everything, a man we had known for 20 years, someone who had written both our wills, handled our property closings, advised us on 100 small legal matters. A trusted person. A mutual person. In 2018, he changed attorneys. He didn't mention it. I found out because a piece of mail arrived addressed to him from a law firm I didn't recognize. Downtown, corporate-looking letterhead, the kind of firm that doesn't do friendly neighborhood wills. I asked him about it. He said it was about a property deal he was working on. Something minor. I believed him. I should have stopped there. I should have pressed. But I didn't because that is what 40 years of trust does. It makes you extend grace in moments when you should be asking harder questions. The second sign was the paperwork. He had always been organized, but he had also always been inclusive. We had a filing cabinet in the home office, joint access. Both of us knew where everything was. In 2019, I went to file some insurance documents, and I noticed that an entire section of the cabinet had been reorganized. Several folders I recognized were gone. I asked him. He said he had moved things to a storage unit for more space. I believed him. I believed him. The third sign was the silence. And this one I should have heard louder than anything else. He stopped talking about the future. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that would have alarmed me. But in a quiet, steady withdrawal from the shared planning we had always done. We used to talk about where we would travel when the grandchildren got older. We used to talk about whether we should downsize in a few years, whether we wanted to be near the kids or somewhere warm. Those conversations just stopped. When I brought them up, he was vague, distracted. He changed the subject or gave short answers. I thought he was tired. I thought he was aging. I thought it was grief. We had lost 2 friends in those years, and he never grieved well. I reached for every explanation except the right one. And while I was reaching, he was building a case. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in October 2020. A specific Tuesday. Because that is the day the quiet phase ended and the war began, even though I didn't know we were at war yet. He asked me to sign a document. He slid it across the kitchen table with a pen already uncapped, like it was nothing. Like it was a grocery list. He said it was an estate planning update. A trust restructuring. Something our new accountant had recommended to minimize tax exposure. He used technical language, the kind of language that is designed to make you feel like asking a question would reveal your ignorance. The kind of language that people use when they want you to sign something without reading it. I reached for it. I started reading. He said, "It's fine, I've already gone over it with the attorney. It's just a formality." I kept reading. He said, "You know I wouldn't ask you to sign anything that wasn't in our best interest." Our best interest. He said our. I signed it. And that right there is the moment I have replayed more times than I can count. That ordinary Tuesday morning at the kitchen table, with coffee going cold and the news on low in the background, and me signing a document I didn't fully read because 46 years of marriage had taught me to extend trust. I didn't know what I had signed. I wouldn't know for over a year. But I know now. I know exactly what I signed. And I want you to feel the weight of it, because this is the part of the story where everything that comes after was already decided. I just hadn't been told yet. The next year was normal. On the surface. The holidays came, the grandchildren visited, we celebrated our 45th anniversary at a restaurant we loved. Photographs were taken. There was laughter. Real laughter. I was not performing happiness. I was genuinely happy in those moments. But underneath, something had already changed in him. I can see it now in the photographs from that period. Something behind his eyes. A distance. Not coldness exactly. More like someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right time to announce it. He started staying later at the office. He started being less available by phone. He started having conversations he walked out of the room to finish. I noticed. I filed it in that drawer in my mind where I put things that worried me, but that I wasn't ready to examine. That drawer was getting very full. And then, in January of 2022, he told me he wanted a divorce. He said it at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table. He sat across from me, and he said the words calmly and clearly, like a man who had rehearsed them. He said he had not been happy for a long time. He said we had grown apart. He said he thought we would both be better off. He used the word amicable. He said he wanted this to be amicable. I didn't speak. I sat there and I looked at him, at this man I had shared a bed with for 45 years, at this man who had held my hand in the hospital 3 times, at this man whose children I had carried and raised and loved, and I could not find a single word. The silence lasted a long time. And then he slid another document across the table. This one was a settlement proposal. Already drafted. Already detailed. A document that had taken someone weeks to prepare. He had been planning this for a long time. While I was planning Thanksgiving. While I was buying birthday gifts for the grandchildren. While I was living our life, he had been ending it, professionally, legally, strategically, and he had not said a single word. That is the part that broke me first. Not the divorce. The silence. The deliberate, calculated silence of a man who had decided to rearrange my entire existence without once giving me the chance to have a voice. I want to tell you what was in that settlement proposal, because this is where it stops being a sad divorce story and becomes something else entirely. The house, our house, the one we had built together, the one I had spent 44 years inside, was listed as an asset of the trust he had created. The trust one had unknowingly helped him establish by signing that document at the kitchen table in October 2020. My signature was on that paperwork. My signature was being used to justify my exclusion. The financial accounts we had maintained jointly for decades had been restructured. Several of them had been moved into accounts in his name only over the previous 2 years. The amounts I could now verify were substantially lower than they should have been. His proposed settlement offered me a monthly payment, like a pension, for the house I had lived in and maintained for 44 years, for the marriage I had invested my entire adult life in, for the financial contributions I had made through 40 years of domestic labor and household management. He proposed a monthly payment that would not have covered my rent anywhere in the city we lived in. And then there was a clause I nearly missed. A clause buried on page 7 of a 12-page document, written in language so deliberately dense that I had to read it 4 times before I understood what it said. It restricted my contact with our grandchildren pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. He had put my grandchildren in a legal document as leverage. My grandchildren. The 7 children of my 3 children. Children I had cared for, babysat, helped raise. Children who called me on their birthdays, who had slept in my house, who had helped me plant that garden in the backyard. He had turned them into a bargaining chip. That is when I understood. That is the exact moment, sitting at that kitchen table with that document in my hands, when I understood that this was not a divorce. This was not 2 people ending a marriage. This was a man who had spent years quietly building a case, and who now intended to use every resource he had accumulated, every legal mechanism available to him, to leave me with nothing. Not just financially. Completely. He wanted to erase the life I had lived. He wanted to make it as if I had never really been here. I put the document down. I stood up. I walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I want to be very clear about that. I did not cry. I was too angry to cry. The weeks after that were the darkest of my life. I want to be honest about that because I think it's important. I think people need to know that there is a specific kind of pain that comes from this kind of betrayal. A betrayal from someone who knows you completely, who knows exactly where you are most vulnerable, and who uses that knowledge with precision. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake at 3 in the morning running calculations in my head, trying to account for money I knew should be there, trying to remember every document I had ever signed, trying to reconstruct 46 years of financial history from memory. I stopped eating properly. Not dramatically. I wasn't in crisis, not the kind you call someone about, but I would sit down at meals and realize I had no appetite, and I would push the food around and think about the garden in the backyard, and wonder if I was going to lose it. I felt ashamed. This is the part one finds hardest to admit, even now. I felt ashamed. Not of him. Of myself. I felt like I should have seen it. I felt like a woman who spent her entire life paying attention to the details should have caught this before it became a catastrophe. I felt stupid. I felt foolish. I felt like I had failed at the one thing I thought I was good at, which was knowing my own life. And underneath the shame was something that felt very close to disappearing. Not physically, I want to be clear, I was never in danger of harming myself, but a psychological disappearing. A feeling like if this man could rewrite the terms of my entire existence, if he could take the house and the money and threaten the grandchildren and do it all legally and systematically, then what exactly was I? Who was I, really? What did I have that was mine? That feeling was the most dangerous thing he did to me. More dangerous than the legal documents. More dangerous than the financial manipulation. He had engineered a situation in which I was questioning my own existence, my own worth, my own reality. And I believe that was deliberate. I believe he knew that if he could make me feel small enough, lost enough, ashamed enough, I would accept whatever he offered. I would sign what he put in front of me. I would be so desperate to maintain some fragment of the life I knew that I would agree to terms that were unjust, because unjust is still something, and nothing was too terrifying to contemplate. He almost won. He almost won. I didn't realize it then, but the phone call that changed everything came from my youngest daughter. She had noticed something was wrong before I told her anything. She had been watching her father more closely than I knew, because she had noticed something shift in him over the previous year. A satisfaction, she called it, in her voice that carried her own contained fury, a satisfaction that she couldn't place, but that had troubled her. She called me one afternoon in February, 6 weeks after he handed me those papers, and she didn't ask how I was. She said, "Mom, I need you to tell me the truth about what's happening." And I did. For the first time since that January morning, I sat down, and I told someone the truth.
She didn't panic.
She didn't cry. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she said, "He's done this before." I went very still. She said, "Not to you. But I've watched him do it to other people in business. The patience. The slow reorganization. The document that looks like nothing. Mom, this is not something he decided in January. This has been building for years." The clarity of that was like cold water on a burn. Because she was right. Of course she was right. I had known it in my body for months before she said it, but hearing it confirmed by someone who had watched him from the outside, that was what broke through the shame and the fog. That night, I stopped grieving and I started thinking. I found an attorney. Not through anyone he knew. Not through our community, our social circle, our church. I found a woman. A divorce attorney with 28 years of practice and a reputation for complex asset cases, through a referral from someone I had not seen in years. Someone completely outside our world. I met her in her office with a folder I had spent 3 weeks assembling. Copies of every document I could locate. Bank statements going back 5 years. Property records. The trust documents. The settlement proposal. Every photograph I had taken of paperwork over the years without ever knowing why I was doing it, just filing them away because something in me had known to keep records. She read through everything for 40 minutes while I sat across from her and tried to keep my breathing even. And when she looked up at me, she said 3 words that I want you to hear because they started the reversal of everything he had done. She said, "This is fraud." Not maybe. Not possibly. Not this is complicated and we'll see. She said, "This is fraud." She walked me through what she was seeing. The trust had been established using my signature, but I had never been provided with full disclosure of what I was signing. The financial accounts had been moved systematically over a 2-year period in a pattern that, she said, courts look at very carefully. The grandchildren clause was aggressive overreach and, in her assessment, was not going to stand the way he had written it because our children, the parents of those grandchildren, had rights in that question that superseded his leverage attempt. And then she said something I keep coming back to even now. She said, "He counted on you not having this information until it was too late." He was wrong. I have to pause here and tell you what that moment felt like. Because I need you to understand this. I was 73 years old. I had spent 6 weeks feeling like I was disappearing. I had spent 6 weeks questioning my own competence, my own worth, my own ability to survive what was happening to me. And this woman, a professional stranger, someone I had met 90 minutes earlier, looked at me and said, he was wrong. That was the beginning of the fight. The legal process was slow and it was brutal, and I will not pretend otherwise. My attorney filed motions immediately to freeze the transfer of assets pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. This was critical. The goal was to prevent any further movement of money or property before the court could examine what had already been moved. He responded through his attorney with a counterfiling that was aggressive in a way that surprised even my attorney. Not because of its legal merit, she felt confident in our position, but because of its tone. It was punishing. There is no other word for it. The language was designed to demean, to diminish, to characterize me as someone who had contributed nothing to the marriage, who had no claim to the assets because my contributions had been domestic rather than financial, who was, in the framing of his attorney, essentially a dependent who had been generously supported for 46 years. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 46 years of running a household, raising children, managing finances, maintaining a home, supporting a career, building a family, and his legal team argued that this was not a contribution, that I was a dependent. I read that filing 3 times. And then I called my attorney and I said, "What do we need to do?" I didn't realize it then, but his strategy was beginning to crack. Not because of anything dramatic, not because of a single decisive moment, but because the slow, systematic dismantling of a life leaves evidence, and evidence, when examined by the right people in the right context, is very difficult to argue with. The forensic accountant my attorney hired spent 6 weeks reviewing financial records. 6 weeks. And what she found was a picture of exactly what my youngest daughter had described, a patient, methodical, multi-year reorganization of assets that had begun, as best as she could determine, approximately 4 years before he handed me the settlement papers. For years, while I was living our life, while I was planning holidays and caring for grandchildren and tending that garden, he had been for 4 years slowly moving pieces off the board. The forensic accountant's report became the centerpiece of our case. It documented every account transfer, every trust modification, every financial action that had occurred over that 4-year period. It showed a pattern that was impossible to explain as coincidence or routine estate planning. It showed intent. His attorneys attempted to rebut it. They brought in their own financial expert. But our accountant had been thorough in a way that was almost beautiful to watch, methodical, documented, airtight. His expert's rebuttal was, my attorney told me later, among the weakest she had seen in 28 years of practice. There was a deposition in May. His deposition. I was not present for it. My attorney advised against it, said she needed him not to be performing for my reaction, but she told me afterward what had happened. He had been calm at first, controlled. This was a man who had spent 4 years planning, who had clearly prepared extensively, who believed he was the most prepared person in the room. And then she started asking about specific transactions, specific dates, specific accounts, and the preparation began to show its gaps. Because he had prepared for the version of me he had always known, the wife who trusted him, who didn't press too hard, who gave benefit of the doubt. He had not prepared for the version of me who had spent 4 months working with a forensic accountant and a seasoned attorney who had seen this exact pattern before. My attorney told me there was one moment in the deposition where he was asked to explain a particular financial transfer, a significant one, made 14 months before he served me with divorce papers, and he paused for a full 20 seconds. She said the court reporter had to ask him if he wanted the question repeated. She said in 28 years, she had seen many pauses. But a 20-second pause from a man who had spent 46 years in business, from a man who was supposed to be in complete control of his narrative. She said that was the moment she knew he had won. I wept when she told me that. In her office, sitting across from her desk, I wept. Not from relief, not yet, but from something that had been compressed for so long it needed somewhere to go. The image of him in that room, realizing for the first time that he had miscalculated, that I had not simply accepted what he put in front of me, that the woman he had spent 46 years believing he could manage had become someone he could not outmaneuver. That image undid me completely. The court proceedings lasted 11 months. 11 months of documents and hearings and counterfilings and negotiations that broke down and restarted. 11 months of phone calls with my attorney and late nights reading through legal language and explaining to my children, who had by now all three retained their own attorneys to protect their own interests and their children's, what was happening and why it was taking so long. My children. I want to tell you about my children in this period because they are the part of this story I am most proud of. When he had included that grandchildren clause, when he had made our grandchildren into leverage, he had made a miscalculation that I think, on some level, he never recovered from. Because my three children were adults with their own legal standing, and when they learned what their father had attempted to do, their response was not confusion. It was not divided loyalty. It was unified and immediate and absolute. They supported me. All three of them. Completely. My eldest daughter, she is a lawyer herself, as it happens, though not in family law, became, in effect, a fourth set of eyes on every document that crossed my desk. My son, who is the most measured of my three children, the one most likely to attempt reconciliation, reached a point where he said, quietly and with his jaw set in the way I remembered from when he was a teenager, he doesn't get to do this. And my youngest, who had made the phone call in February that started everything. She came to every court appearance. Every single one. She sat beside me in the hallway outside the courtroom and held my hand and did not say much because she knew I didn't need words. She just made sure I was never alone. He had threatened to use the grandchildren as isolation. He had bet on the fact that if he could separate me from them, he could break me. What he had not counted on was that my children were not his to weaponize. They were adults who could see clearly and choose freely. And they chose me. That is not the outcome he had planned. I know that because of something our mediator told me, off the record, near the end of the process. He said that in his experience, one of the most common miscalculations in cases like this was when the initiating spouse assumed their children would remain neutral or be managed. He said in his experience, children rarely remained neutral when they understood what their other parent had actually done. He said it with the professional detachment of a man who had seen it many times, but even through the detachment I could hear something, a recognition that the strategy had been, at its core, a failure of understanding. A failure of knowing the people around him as well as he believed he did. He had spent 46 years underestimating me. In the end, he had underestimated our children too. The settlement was reached in March 2023, 14 months after he slid those papers across the kitchen table. I will not give you every detail of the financial outcome because this is not a story about money, and I think the moment it becomes a story about money, it loses the thing that actually matters. What I will tell you is this: the forensic accounting evidence was determinative. The court found that the asset transfers had been made without proper disclosure and over the terms of the original settlement were substantially renegotiated. The trust was restructured to include joint control provisions. The grandchildren clause was struck entirely. As my attorney had predicted, it did not stand. And the house. Our house. The 4-bedroom colonial on the corner lot with the garden in the backyard and the river stone over the dog's grave. The house he had transferred into a trust using my uninformed signature. I kept it. I want to say that again because it still, even now, lands with a weight that is hard to articulate. I kept it. Not because the law gave me a gift, not because I got lucky, but because a woman who still had my signature on those documents had not signed away the right to understand what she had signed. Because a forensic accountant had spent 6 weeks rebuilding a paper trail. Because my attorney had spent 11 months in that fight with everything she had. Because my children had stood beside me when their father had expected them to stay neutral. Because I had stopped disappearing and started fighting. I moved back into the house in April 2023. He had been living there during the proceedings, another calculated pressure he had applied, knowing how much it cost me not to be inside those walls, and the day I walked back in, the first thing I did was go to the backyard. I stood at the river stone. I had been gone for 14 months. The garden had not been tended. Things had gone to seed, grown wild, spread in the way things do when no one is paying attention. There was work to do. A lot of work. I stood there for a long time. Not crying. Not triumphant. Just present. Just standing in the place I had built with my hands over 40 years, in the place he had tried to take from me, in the place where something of me was buried and something of me was still growing, and I let myself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. And then I went inside, and I made a cup of tea. And this time, when I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden, I held the cup, and I felt the warmth of it in my hands, and I didn't let it go cold. There are things I lost that I cannot recover.
I want to be honest about that.
The version of my life I had believed in, the version where the marriage had been real from beginning to end, where the love had been consistent, where the history we built together was built in good faith, that version is gone. I cannot unknow what I know. I cannot look back at 46 years and see them the way I used to. There is a shadow over the memory that I've had to learn to live with, and I don't think it ever entirely lifts. I lost years of ease I should have had. I should have been spending my 70s traveling, watching my grandchildren grow, tending my garden without a legal battle in the background. Instead, I spent them fighting for my own existence. I am 75 years old now, and the fight cost me something in my body, and something in my sleep, and something in my capacity for the kind of uncomplicated ease I used to take for granted. That is a real loss. I don't minimize it. And I lost the marriage. Obviously, I lost the marriage. But I want to say something about that loss that I don't think people expect to hear. I grieved the marriage genuinely, not as a pretense and not strategically, but as a real human loss. The marriage I had believed I had, the marriage of 46 years that I had thought was built in mutual respect and love, that marriage deserved to be grieved. Even if the man at its center turned out not to be who I thought he was, the life I had lived inside that marriage was real. The love I had given was real. The children we made were real. The home we built was real. I am not required to erase the good, because the ending was catastrophic. I grieved it honestly, and I let it go, and I am still letting it go. But I did not lose myself. That is the thing he most wanted. He wanted me small and compliant, and so frightened of losing everything that I would accept anything. He wanted me to disappear into his version of events, into the narrative where I had been a dependent who had received 46 years of generosity and should be grateful for whatever he chose to offer at the end. I refused to disappear. And that refusal, that specific, determined refusal, is the thing I am most proud of. I think a lot about why he did it. Not from a place of anger anymore. I have moved past most of the anger, or at least past the kind that burns constantly. But from genuine curiosity. Because a man who spends 4 years systematically dismantling his wife's security while she sleeps beside him, while she cooks his meals and tends his home and loves him as best she can, that man is not motivated by practical necessity. The money would have been divided fairly in a straightforward divorce. There was no reason for the complexity, the deception, the years of silent planning. My attorney, when I asked her about this near the end of the case, said something I keep returning to. She said, "In my experience, these cases are almost never about money. Money is just the instrument. They're about power, about who gets to say what the story was." He wanted to write the ending. He wanted to be the one who determined what my life had added up to, what it had been worth, what I would walk away with. He wanted me to receive whatever he chose to give, not because he needed it, but because the act of determining it was itself the point.
Control.
Not love. Not fairness. Not even bitterness. Just the desire to be the one who held the pen when the final account was drawn up. I took the pen back. That is what this story is really about. It is not about money, not about the house, not even entirely about justice, though I believe justice mattered, and I fought for it. It is about the right to hold the pen. The right to say, this is what my life was. This is what I contributed. This is what I am owed. This is who I am. No one, not a husband, not a lawyer, not a legal document written in deliberately obscure language, gets to take that away from me. I am telling you this because I am not the only one. I have spoken to women since this happened, women in their 60s and 70s who came to me because they had heard something about what I had been through, women who told me their own versions of the story in lowered voices with their eyes moving to make sure no one was listening, women who described the same slow silence, the same legal language appearing, the same feeling of waking up one day to find that the life they had built had been rearranged while they were trusting. I am telling you, because the belief that your age makes you powerless is something that people count on. Your age does not make you powerless. Your long marriage does not mean you have surrendered your rights. Your love, your genuine, decades-long love for another person, does not obligate you to accept injustice from them. Family is not immunity. The people who love us are, in fact, the people best positioned to harm us because they know exactly where we are most open. That is not a reason to stop loving, but it is a reason to stay awake. It is a reason to know where your documents are, to know what you have signed, to know what your name is on and what it is not on, to have your own attorney, your own financial advisor, your own understanding of your own life. Not out of suspicion, out of respect for yourself. The woman who knows her own life cannot be told she never had one. I am 75 years old. I live in my house. I garden in the backyard. My grandchildren visit on weekends, and last month we planted tomatoes together, and the youngest one got soil all over her shoes, and I laughed in a way I had not laughed in 3 years. A deep laugh, from somewhere unguarded. I am not the same person I was at the beginning of the story. I am not entirely healed. I don't think you heal completely from this kind of thing, and I am skeptical of anyone who tells you that you do. There are mornings when I wake up at 4 a.m. and lie in the dark and feel something that has no exact name, something that is partly grief and partly anger, and partly the specific sorrow of lost time. But I am here. I am still here. The house is mine. The garden is mine. The grandchildren are mine in every way that matters. My children are mine. My story is mine. He wanted to erase me. He did not. And I will tell you, sitting here, having lived through everything I have lived through, having come out the other side of something that I genuinely believed, in those darkest nights, might break me entirely, I will tell you that there is a kind of wholeness that comes after surviving your own erasure. A kind of groundedness that you can only earn by going to the edge and refusing to fall. I don't recommend the path. But I am grateful for where I stand. I want to close by saying something directly to you. To whoever is listening to this right now, wherever you are. If you are someone who recognized yourself in the story, if you heard something in my account of that cold cup of tea, of that silence, of that document slid across the table like it was nothing, I want you to hear this. You are not stupid for having trusted. You are not weak for having loved. You are not powerless now. The fact that someone used your trust as a weapon says everything about them and nothing about you. Your love was real even if theirs was not. Your contribution was real even if they refused to name it. Your life is real even if someone tried to write you out of it. Find your attorney. Build your evidence. Let your children see clearly. Ask the hard questions you should have asked earlier without shame, because the questions are never too late as long as you are still here to ask them. Age is not helplessness. Love is not a contract of surrender. And family does not grant immunity from accountability. I was 73 years old when someone tried to erase me. I am 75 years old, and I am still here. What would you have done at my age? What would you do today?
Think about that.
And if you know someone living inside a silence that sounds like mine, please pass this on.